All right, well, I think we'll get started. So before the meat of the actual session, you're gonna get several disclaimers. So let's get through the red tape before I proceed with real content. So first of all, pretty much in all the examples you see here, React is going to be used as the example. But I want to say up front that the technique that we're employing and that I'm going to be sharing here is not exclusive to React. It's very intentionally capable of being used with any VDOMI front-end framework or front-end library. The framework distinction should not be made. So I don't want it to think that this is React-centric, although it is what we've used it with thus far. All right, disclaimer 2. There's going to be rambling tech details. It's something I'm known to do. The implementation details, I'm going to share some of them. They're going to be techy. But what I hope is the key takeaway is not exactly how this works, but the fact that it does work and what it can do. The details can be dealt with later, but what I'm going to explain here maybe will help kind of validate skepticism of how the heck is this done. But just if you have an idea of what can be done and how you might be able to leverage it in your own projects, I think is really the key thing to know. Everything else is gravy on top. All right, so the final disclaimer is these presentations are supposed to have pictures, and I do have pictures of code and pages, but in a lot of it, there's not really an applicable picture. And I didn't want to find pictures of impossibly beautiful people on a laptop or just the Getty images that are really standard. So my son hooked me up with pictures. So manage your expectations accordingly. Anyway, so this is Modern JavaScript and Drupal without going headless. So I'm Ben Mullins. So yeah, my Drupal.org name is Benjamin M, but with all the vowels stripped out. I work for Acquia on the Drupal Acceleration Team. I kind of joke that I'm the person on the Drupal Acceleration Team that nobody knows, and then people know everybody else. And I've been doing that for a little over 5 years. I'm also a core committer, front-end framework manager, and currently at Acquia, I'm working full-time on Experience Builder. So that's just basically what I'm going to be showing you here is a key part of Experience Builder, and you're gonna see how I'm doing it. But before we get to that, I want to talk about 2 different personas that inspired this idea to begin with. And the first one are my students. So I'm also a professor at University of Michigan, and I teach a JavaScript/React class. And there used to be a Drupal class at the School of Information where I graduated from and now teach. And a couple years ago, between the complexity of Drupal 8, the diminishing popularity of PHP, they did not feel like they could properly intro even University of Michigan grad students to Drupal within the frame of a semester and get satisfying results. I think that's really unfortunate. It's still a great content management system, but for those reasons and more, it just was not feasible to introduce people. And frankly, I think we lost a pipeline into the community, and myself included, and several of my colleagues as well. But basically what I want to point out, though, is that I teach React, and a lot of my students buy into React as a result of the class. They pursue internships that have React. We're all familiar probably with that really steep Drupal learning curve cartoon, right? Well, so what happens is with my students, they hit a similar cliff, but it's after they bought into React. They already made interactive things. They're really happy with it. And then they have to do CRUD. Then they have to do authentication. Then they have to do routing. And they are similarly terrified. They are annoyed. They don't know what to do. But because they've already bought into React, it's not at the very beginning. They have faith in it, and they kind of see it through. But with Drupal, you're faced with all that stuff at the beginning. But the positive side of this is that I feel like a lot of the things that new React developers face, kind of the first big hurdles, happen to be things that Drupal does incredibly well. You can just log in. Permissions are amazing. A lot of the strengths of Drupal happen to be things that are incredibly difficult to do for the first time when you're making decoupled apps. I have another persona here. And this is the modernization inclined. And so people just want to see Drupal have a better admin UI. And I think that's a very reasonable desire, and React and similar libraries make that much easier to do than a bunch of jQuery spaghetti. And so, but there were efforts in the past that by people way smarter than me that attempted to do this as a headless admin UI. And what was discovered is that you lose a lot of what Drupal does well. It's kind of similar. So Drupal has an amazing form API. There's a lot of field widgets that do their job really nicely and have battle-tested test coverage. Why rebuild all those things if it already does it really well? So what if the React trained students who have already bought into React could see Drupal as the thing that kind of smooths out the hard parts that they run into? Maybe they could take an entry-level job where they're asked to build things in React, but the path from content to the React component is easier. They don't have to deal with all the extra baggage of roles, authentication, and so on, because Drupal already does that really well. They don't have to run into thinking they had all their routes set up, but there's a handful of things that were expecting a hash and that wasn't conveyed, and just all sorts of little problems that come up when you decouple. But you can put these people to work. They can gradually learn Drupal, but they can use their existing React knowledge to work with the system and get used to it. Because Drupal's hard, but it is worth it. Why not give someone an entry point using the technology that a lot of newer developers are already trained in? And so the modernization inclined, using this approach, can get their React in places where it's beneficial, but they don't have to switch to an entirely different ecosystem. It's still regular Drupal, but React where it's helpful. So this is kind of based on a belief that we already have render arrays at home. So Drupal render arrays, right? It's content and it's the structure. It has all the information you need about what's going to go on the page and where is it going to go. If you're dealing with a conventional headless application, you're providing the content. Maybe there's some metadata that says, if you want, I'm kind of into this being on the left side of the page, but ultimately it's up to the component developer to decide what to do with that data. So what if we could also convey that structure, the layout that we've determined using the block UI, and that information could also be given to React, and we just take care of everything without even having to go headless. It's just React rendered there. Another thing that we kept in mind when coming up with this is that JSX is kind of twiggy, right? So twig, you got your markup. It's HTML instead of JSX, but I mean, JSX can be HTML. You can inject variables, and with a React component, it's props. It's basically the same thing. And then you're offered a certain amount of logic. With JSX, you have way more logic available to you. Last I knew, Twig didn't have a fetch, but one of the people here probably has made a module that does that I'm unaware of. But JSX is twiggy. So if we could convey that structure and we could use JSX components in the place of Twig templates, I mean, seems possible, right? At least in theory. Well, we have two projects that have taken these ideas and put them to reality. So the first one is the JSX. We call it the JSX theme engine. It's a proof of concept project. It does a lot of cool stuff, and I'm going to show you a little bit of it. Also, if this is sparking anybody's interest, hop in there and make weird stuff. It's intended to kind of proof of concept things, then we figure out how to make them a little more refined and official when we go in. So let me begin by showing you just a little bit of what the JSX theme engine looks like. So this is your umami page. So this is not rendered solely by Twig. This is a combination of JSX and Twig. So we have this handy little debug here. And these are all the Twig templates currently in use. If I want to know what they are, I just click on them and I can see here. And these are all the JSX templates in use. And same thing. Something that's a little bonus here is one thing I noticed during the shift from Drupal 7 to 8 was that especially some newer developers who are quite happy to go into PHP template, DPM their render array and just find what they needed. I swear I saw nosebleeds happen when they had to deal with Twig. And they'd have to break things down into smaller steps. They'd run out of memory. They just didn't know how to get what they did. And if something was hidden behind a accessor function, it was so, give them a little bit of rope, make it easier. So in this case, you click on one of these, and there's literally, yep, that's everything you need. It's already printed out. So we're just taking advantage of console log. We click it. There's no mystery where the content is. And so that is available. This is literally what's available as props to your component. And so let me show you the next one. So this is Experience Builder. We're also using the same concept, but in this case, the whole theme for JSX Theme Engine, the whole theme is React. So from the top down, it renders it in React. For Experience Builder, this is a React application, and we are injecting bits of Drupal into it. And more specifically, let me show you. So some of you may recognize this as one of Ringo Starr's MS Paint works. He sells them for a lot of money, apparently. But basically, when you click on any component, right, you get a props form. I'm also demonstrating here that we are using the vanilla JavaScript media library widget here. But if you look underneath the hood, this form, all right, this form is React, but it's generated by the form API. So we are able to use the existing widget we have. We are able to, just all the functionality that we already created around media library, which works really well, is there. But by having it rendered within React, it also means that it has access to Redux for the undo history. And we can add a wide range of, we can add a wide range of other things. And when you make changes here, it automatically updates the layout. So let's take a quick tour of going into vanilla JavaScript. So we removed here. Let me close that so it's not highlighted. So we removed here, and that was a vanilla JavaScript thing, which just works. If you re-render, the event listeners remain intact. It just works. We're going to add media. This is the old school. And yeah, it absolutely failed during the demo. I assure you it works. I have Zoom videos of it. But let me try it one more time, and let's see. I was making jokes about this to myself. So there we go. So that's what it's supposed to do, right? So this is just a regular media library widget. But we need React in order to communicate the changes we make there to the layout. So I'm going to switch Ringo to a cute dog. And we got that. So yeah, the widget, we could replace it with React if we wanted, but it's kind of not broken. It's pretty nice. Lots of great test coverage for it. Maybe just keep it, right? But the form itself is rendered by React. It lets us communicate with the React app. And that lets us sync up our, let me show you one more thing, but yeah, let's just sync up all our content. So we'll go to the hero. And so by having it React, that will allow us to dynamically update things. So we kind of just got the best of both things. So this is a full-on form API form. You submit it, goes through the same validation. If you have a hash that is protecting that form, that hash works. And if it requires a hash, it properly fails things. But I don't want to give up the form API in order to get React. It's really cool. It's incredibly helpful. And this also means that although I'm sure that there's going to be some hurdles for contrib modules to work with the Experience Builder props form, there's going to be far fewer hurdles because we're able to use the form API, and we can gracefully use Twig templates when there aren't React components available. And this also, the way that we're doing it, if there are changes necessary, more likely than not, the changes that a contrib module would have to make are going to be on the server side. So I think it'd be very unfortunate to expect someone who has a 100% PHP module to suddenly have to start writing React in order for their contrib module to work well with Experience Builder. So the goal here is to blend this in a way that people can stick to what they're good at, but it's available to everybody. All right, so let's head back to regular old slides here. But that's showing off what it does. All right, so what's it actually doing? All right, so it's a render array. It's still markup that's getting rendered to the page, but the markup's not for eyeballs. So this is markup that's intended to be consumed by React instead. So here's a screenshot, and this is just with JavaScript disabled. And what you'll see in here is we have a template tag. It doesn't have to be a template tag, but it's kind of nice because that makes sure that this the markup is inert. It won't make your accessibility test fail because it sees duplicate IDs or anything like that. But this is essentially a map that you can send to React, and it's going to obey the structure of that. So let me show you kind of what will make it a little closer here. So this is huge. I think some of the slides kind of show this as well, but this is what the markup looks like. So I'll give you a little bit of a tour of this. It doesn't have to be a template, and it doesn't have to have this Hyperscriptify attribute, but basically it does have to have a common parent, just like any VDOM element creation library. You'll notice here that there's a lot of custom elements that begin with Drupal. These all correspond to Twig templates that we have hijacked and turned into JSX components. So there's still divs, there's still links, but in this case, right, this is block.html.twig, but we hijacked it, and now it's Drupal-block, which will ultimately become a JSX rendered block. All of the variables that we'd pass in with Twig template are in attributes here. And then there's additional for things such as on the page template where you're dealing with regions. We use the slots attribute to make sure that those things go into the location that they're intended to go into. If you have multiple render children, you still need control over the order that they appear, and slots translates perfectly into that. So yeah, so this is kind of what I showed you already. So I ruined a little bit of the surprise, but said this becomes a rendered React app, and that's yes. So in this case, I'll show you the difference between the system branding block for Umami and the system branding block with JSX, and they don't look that different. So, here's the existing system branding block, and then, it's very, very similar. It would look a lot more similar if this didn't recently switch to SDCs, but it's basically doing the same thing, but instead of having the front matter on the top that says you have these Twig variables, it just comes in as props, and then you can, we got the site logo. It's not that different from Twig. I feel like hopefully that it won't be much of an adjustment if people start using it. It's like, oh, it's Twig, but it's syntax that I can look up on MDN. All right, so let's head back to this. All right, so we have that map, right? That's you saw a bunch of unwieldy markup that a browser wouldn't really know what to do with, but React does. How is that turned into React? So Effulgencia, a coworker and mentor, has a library called Hyperscriptify. You can check that out on GitHub. And that is kind of the root of it. Okay, so you have the root of whatever you want to render. Just like React, you need one top-level element. Second argument, it's whatever framework you're using, whatever creates a VDOM node, you got to throw it in there. So in this case, this is Prerequisite H. You need to make it aware of whatever framework you're using, fragment, because we add a ton of fragments, because a lot of time there's no guarantee that things are going to be wrapped the way they need to be. This one is components, and this is actually one that I hope to simplify, but this is a map of so what we have in the template and what it should ultimately be as a JSX component. For this one, I hope down the road that we actually don't need to map it explicitly, and we can just use naming conventions. I think it's possible, but it's not there yet. And then finally, we have custom methods for converting attributes to props. So whatever the specific needs are. This will have the basics, so if you're sending it to React and it sees class, it automatically converts it to class name or classless, I can't remember, but it makes it the one that isn't a reserved word. So it's kind of a laundry list of things to shift, but you can customize that. You pass in whatever you want. So if you have specific needs, we do some weird stuff with like on clicks and so on that you wouldn't want to have in the default. All right, and something else that I don't know if this was a worry I had very early on when we did this. So I don't know if it crossed anybody's mind yet, because this is already a big info dump, but what if the render array has something attached, right? So we're adding stuff, and when you introduce new elements to the page using Drupal's AJAX API, if there are assets in CSS, JS, or settings that are not yet present on the page, our AJAX API takes care of it. So what we're doing, and this is currently an experience builder and will likely be everywhere that this is used. When you bring it down, we look at, before we provide the response, we add all of the JS, CSS, and settings to the headers. Those headers are parsed, and then they are sent right to the AJAX API. So they're added the same way. Ultimately, we're using the same API to add them, but we're using headers to deliver them instead of having it kind of like snuck in the divs like it currently does. And so great. I kind of showed you the mutant markup, and I have also showed you this Hyperscriptify function that it travels through the mutant markup and makes it a React app. But how does that mutant markup get made? So I'll show you a little bit of the engine behind the scenes. So basically, what we have here is we're taking advantage of the engine files. And we're going to look here, and if we see, if this is basically looking for the JSX version. If we don't see it, we just use the regular twig and we render it in place. And then we have already rendered twig that is just a child of the React that's made. If not, we go through this deal, and this might look familiar. We're wrapping it in a template, and we're creating, we're adapting the props, a bunch of other stuff, but we reshape the render array, and there's a couple important things we do there. This is where we build the custom elements, or we wrap things with fragments. And this is also where we unpack a lot of the content. So this is kind of similar to what JSON API does, but let's say you have an entity with a bunch of fields. We expose those fields instead of having accessor functions. And there might be limitations that if you want to grab it in another way, but we just want to make it available. It's all there. It's all snoopable. You can just console log it and see what's there. I think that's a real benefit. But yeah, so basically we're taking advantage of theme engines there. All right. And so yeah, another example here, just to kind of get you an idea of the slots. So this is page HTML twig versus the JSX. And just to give you an idea that this is how it respects, it'll actually respect the structure, right? So ultimately, when you're determining the order of something, this page pre-header, page header, that is, one of many children in the render array without the pound in front of it. And when we parse it, if we see a render child, and there's a couple setup things that you'll see at the end if time permits, but ultimately it becomes the same thing. But this is transferred via slots because it's not available otherwise. All right, so we actually got through that. I'm taking a look at that. Excellent. All right, I was worried this would take way too long to explain all the minutia and everything. But yeah, so now I want to kind of return to how can this benefit our personas. All right, so for the student, I think the version of this that they are going to like the most is going to be the JSX theme, where they could have a project that is more JSX than Twig and can just hop on it using something they know. And then maybe the scenario that is appealing is, by the time they're assigned something where they have to deal with Twig, they're already comfortable with some of the concepts that they did with the JSX versions. And then plus the JSX simply allow you to do more. You can add interactivity. You can, throw HTTP requests right in that template and let it rip. And I guess similarly, right? So the second point here, they can get meaningful results with little or no PHP. And I think that's a big part of helping people buy into something new is how long does it take to feel like you did something remotely worthwhile? And, if all you were able to do is switch a field formatter on something you're not going to use for a month, it's harder to get that momentum in your mind and want to keep going. And ideally, right, we can build this in a way that, Drupal is going to take care of the hard parts. They're going to see Drupal as this thing that soothes common areas of frustration. For the modernization client, they're probably going to benefit more from how we're implementing this in Experience Builder. And that's because you can have reactified areas within pages that are otherwise traditionally rendered. And most, maybe all, contrib will continue to work. And I mean, with Experience Builder, most of the obstacles are actually not specific to rendering our forms this way. It's specific to Experience Builder itself. We'll see. I'm sure there'll be something that shows up. So based on the available time, I do have a little bit of time to highlight some parts that I think are not great about this, that I believe are surmountable. And we should have time for questions after that and everything, but I do want to share it. So there's a couple things before the semi-coupled JSX approach can be widely used. So right now, that render array, getting to the component, it's not great DX. It requires creating 2 files and updating an object. So you have to, let me just show you, all right? So it's not ideal, but it's, I think we can make it simpler. It just wasn't a priority with what we were figuring out, all right? So we have, if we're setting up, oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. I am gonna zoom. All right, here. Yeah, that's a common request among my students as well. So this replaces the twig template. And this is basically saying, within the render array, what is the data type we're expecting? And so if we say JSX element, that's saying, let's render this in advance. It's just already going to be there, and it's going to be output as an existing element in there. I think a big drawback of this is that in order to set this up, it does require popping on Xdebug or, whatever other method you use, and then finding the things that you want to make sure get to your component as props without mapping out this props property here. You won't get anything as props. And this manual step, I think, it's a bit much. And even if you know how to do it, it's really easy to miss 1 or 2 and then wonder why it's broken. Ideally, we would have something that does this a little more automatically. I've already seen evidence that can happen, but it's not an action. So yeah, if anyone's inspired, hop in. But so this manual setup, not great. Similarly, this is an object that just maps. So if you recall from 15 minutes ago, we create any template that has been JSXified becomes a custom HTML element that is prefixed with Drupal. So here, this is just a big dumb object that says, if this is the custom tag, it corresponds to this component, and then we import all the components. So that is mapping that to that. I don't see why we can't do this just based on naming conventions. I'm sure that's possible. And again, it's just, there's a lot of dueling priorities with all this. So that is another step that I don't think is necessary. And if we get rid of it, I think it would be easier to say that this is an approachable solution. But I think between the 3 steps I told you, so we have to do both the data type mapping and this custom element mapping here, right? So we have to do all that in order for it to finally get here. And once we do that, yeah, this props has everything we set up. But I'd like it to be a little more magic. Magic you have control over, but let some of the stuff get taken care of. So all you have to do is refine what it's doing, not bring it to life. There is an additional pain point. Let's see, if it is articulated on the slide. Yeah, this is not intuitive. Okay. So right now there are limitations to the template discovery and fallback. As happy as I am that it is able to use the twig when the JSX isn't available, there are limitations to it. Again, I believe they are surmountable, but it ain't. It hasn't happened yet. So yeah, this is just easier to explain. So in the 2 different approaches, there's 2 different problems. So with the JSX theme, it'll simply look. So let's say you had block html.twig. If you have block.templateinfo.json, it automatically uses that instead. And that's great. But the problem is that the discovery, once at the stage where that discovery is happening, let me just show you what's going on. At the stage where the discovery is happening, it is only aware of templates within the theme. So we basically just had to copy a bunch of templates to the theme. And so that's not ideal if a contrib module is creating their own template, for example. It currently will not be found unless you copy that to the theme. And yeah, that doesn't sound impossible at all. And I did a little bit of, it might require a change or two to core, but I don't think it'll require crazy changes. So that's a limitation with that. And then the kind of adding it with an experience builder has its own kind of not great DX that I want to highlight. Because, yeah, I'm excited about this, but I do not mind showing you where things need work. All right. So with a theme, we can simply say we're building this in React, and if this isn't available, do this. Use old twig instead. With the approach we're using for Experience Builder, we're instead explicitly marking templates as being JSXable. So we're using theme suggestions to do that. And so we have a bunch of templates here, just with --xb at the end. And so it's looking for, it feels a little hacky. It's just looking for that string, but it works. And that also allows us to, this approach here allows us to apply it in a context-based way, because there's going to be times where you don't want to take over every input twig file. You just want to take it over within a certain form. And by using theme suggestions, you can get away with that. It's not as elegant as it should be. Like you could very well, like in here, we have to hijack theme suggestions alter and a couple other places. And at this point, it just works for me. But I imagine most people hopping in to look at that would, be a little overwhelmed. So those are the biggest pain points, in my opinion. But I've seen only evidence that they can be taken care of. Just a matter of prioritizing. And so finally, just if this question came up, hopefully my excitement kind of answered this implicitly. But if JSX and Twig does the same thing, why bother with a JSX version? And so the first thing to remind you is that if JSX can do a ton of additional stuff that Twig can't, it's React. And I'm sure it's a very common among Drupal people. It's like, well, I can just do this in Twig. But let me tell you, I work with the youth. The youth has a way easier time with JSX. It just makes sense to them. And the Twig, despite being really similar, I don't know, they kind of look at it like they're looking at my record collection. And okay, and then, we just got to look at this, right? So based on that, I think one of the keys to keeping Drupal, relevant and alive is make it possible to have some affordable people work on it too. It shouldn't all be like us pricey people working on it. We have our place, but it'd be nice to have some things done by someone who doesn't cost a lot. I don't know. I was trying to think of a better way to describe that, but we're expensive and we deserve it. We're good at it, right? But and frankly, like I never quite got the hang. I know Xdebug, and the JetBrains makes it easy to debug a Twig template too, but it's just way easier to figure out what's going on underneath the hood with JavaScript. And so, yeah, I'll just read this verbatim, but console log the props is a much easier ask than ideally set up an Xdebug with an IDE that recognizes Twig endpoints but not used. I can't finish it, but that's basically what happens, right? And then you set them up with Xdebug, and then they are too scared to tell you it broke a week and a half later. And let's get rid of that discomfort and just have it be the one sentence console log it, silly. So that was the bonus content. I went faster than I expected. So I'll just bring it back to the concluding image, which is this cat who's cold, and we can open up to questions and hop up to the mic, run stuff by me.
So I think that's already all amazing, but I'm going to ask for one more feature.
Yeah.
Do you think server-side rendering is attainable with this? Because I think that's one of the benefits that our Twig setup still has over JSX. You can see the JavaScript community moving there, but can we do that here as well?
There's a branch. There is an issue in the JSX theme engine where we're trying it out. I believe it's possible. But yeah, I won't say it's definitive yet, but we're already looking into it, and anybody's encouraged to hop into that issue queue and move it along. But yeah, that's something we think would be great.
Okay, that's really cool. And if I may, too, what about TypeScript support for the JavaScript parts? Okay, we're just getting everyone on board with types in PHP. It solves bugs before you ship it to production.
Experience Builder is TypeScript,
Awesome.
but if you want to make JavaScript that works with Experience Builder, we don't enforce the TypeScript for Contrib.
I mean, I don't want to enforce it. I just want it to be possible. So
Oh yeah.
Thanks.
Experience Builder full on TypeScript. Yep.
So my question is about more complex components. So let's say I want to use Framer Motion or React Free Fiber or something like that. How do you bundle it together in the end, the JavaScript?
Oh, so it's just like you would any other React app. Like actually, I'll show you a little bit of some. So, for example, there's a little bit of cleverness going on, right? But in the where are we doing it? So when we create the form in Experience Builder, it needs to interact with Redux. That Redux was already initialized. So, let's see here. Oh my gosh, I'm going to freeze and not remember where it is, but I assure you it's totally there. Let's see. Oh, actually, well, you know what? I can describe it because like my brain would be able to do it if I wasn't being watched. But basically, like
Everyone turn around.
yeah, we so we use the old school create element when we inject a JSX theme engine, and then as arguments we just wrap it in the Redux provider that was already created. And so those things are all possible. Similarly, when we inject things in, we've wrapped it in context, so we have context that like keep track of an entire form. And I'd say the first time figuring it out might have taken 20 minutes or so. My hope is that those kind of problems, many varieties of those problems will be solved in Experience Builder, so people have prior art to look at, because they were all kind of new ways of approaching things, but so far I haven't run into any barriers. All right.
I was wondering if you or anybody else in the this Experience Builder ecosystem has looked at Laravel's inertia. It does a lot of similar things, so it's definitely worth taking a look at. It handles the server-side rendering and also has some opinions on that sort of template mapping that you're talking about. But it's basically, get props from a PHP CMS into your framework of choice.
Oh, fantastic. So much of this is built on looking at things that people have already figured out. So yeah,
Cool.
Thank you for letting me know.
I've also put together like a small proof of concept for it, so we should talk more.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic, Portman. Come on, it's crazy. So I have one too many questions, but I'm not sure if I understand it correctly. So I'll just correct me if I'm wrong. First of all, did you ever look into the error handling in general? Because we are moving towards React components. I'm not sure how will that turn out. And caching, cache revalidation, it's another topic. And I was having this thought that if we have a lot of contrib themes and templates also available, so if let's say any themes that are out there, you want to do also, let's say, JS6 version, and do they all need that wrapper? So eventually it will have to come to Experience Builder so they can actually render, or if there's, I don't know, a middleman somewhere you can just
So
look
I don't think the wrapper will be necessary in the long run. So what we're in the beginning stages of is it's basically just an attribute you put at the top of the render array. And if you have that attribute, it says, please inspect this for React alternatives. And so it'd just be, use React true.
Yeah.
And so we have a version of that happening right now, and it works. And so that should be the way that you should be able to designate something being React rendered when available just by marking it in the render array. Currently, it's all the children. There's no way to stop it once you've put it at the top, but it should be as simple as that. And let's see, caching. So far, it's just worked. Like the tags are present, everything just works. And what was your first question? Because I did have an answer. And I
Error handling.
Error handling. Error handling was something that in Experience Builder we explicitly worked on, and hopefully that's a pattern that people can work on where there is code dedicated to just making available on the screen, and so you can see the JavaScript errors on screen instead of having to go in the console, so you're aware of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, one part is how easy it is to digest the errors you get from a React app, so it's out of the box, it's just, well, hell. So
Yep.
That's one thing I suppose we can look into eventually after it gets a little bit set up. But one other factor I noticed, similarities in the JSON file and the YAML file, usually in a STC component. Can we somehow merge these two eventually? I suppose that's what I'm thinking. You're redefining the props again,
Yeah.
all that, would be nice, eventually to go that way.
Okay, yeah, that's it. I mean, potentially some of that could be defined. Then, yeah, there is similarities. That's a good point. SDCs are used heavily in Experience Builder too. So if there's a way to kind of eliminate some redundancy, good call.
Can I just do one more?
I appreciate the interest.
My bad. So one thing that always come to mind, at least for me, is like we compare Experience Builder to Gutenberg quite often. Why not use Gutenberg? But I suppose I kind of got the answer now that I looked at your presentation. But eventually, even though a lot of people still use Gutenberg as the choice that for the editor that they're using, so I'm not sure how we can put that into Experience Builder. Can you still keep using Gutenberg somehow and keep the rendering part of the page with Experience Builder? I suppose that should be doable, right?
I mean, it should be doable. I would encourage to go Experience Builder as purely as possible, because then you get to take advantage of Drupal's data model. And then Gutenberg, I think they're working on kind of a more robust version now, but last I knew, it's kind of just a blob of tables. And
No, you can
isn't?
do it. Yeah, you
Cool.
can map
Yeah.
everything.
I knew they were working on it. So, I mean, you can use CK Editor like within a prompt you're editing. So, I mean, it should be possible, because you can use you can inject other JS applications into this whole thing. Having that on a site I worked on might make me a little dizzy, but everybody's tolerance is different.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
Hey, so quick question about how state is managed. So most of the examples right now, it appears that it's mostly just being used as sort of a rendering engine for static props. But how is state handled and updated, and lifecycle events and some of the power of React?
Okay, so yeah, we need a good way to do it beyond just on the component level, right? So right now, the proof of concept that I have that I hope can be extended to something more is that managing it on a context level. So when you create the app, there is, in the theme version, there is a universal context, and you can update this. The state's just a big old object that has whatever you need. And when you create forms, every form has its own context, it's basically the form state from PHP, but it's in React as state. And yeah, so we're doing context-based because you don't know what the composition is going to be, right? But if you use context, it's whatever is at the top. It uses that context. Sure. So yeah, that's what we're planning to use, and my hope, and this is way down the road, I guess, but if we're going to get this into core, I think is pretty sure, and then we can have something where core kind of offers those contexts automatically, and then you don't have to worry about the state. You just kind of know it's there. But yeah, gotcha. Good question. That's something I was worried about. So
yes, great. So one other question on that. So with the rendering engine being used, how is the compilation being at what point is that occurring? So when we're rendering those React elements to the page, most of the React and Drupal implementations I've used, we lose a lot of SEO benefits, which is usually what gets kicked back when we try to do some sort of methodology with that. Is this occurring prior to render, and is it able to actually
so you're getting every attribute, so you don't lose nothing in the markup is gone unless your JSX template equivalent does something way different. Are the SEO issues related to something other than the attributes? Does it have to do with timing or?
Yeah, so when JavaScript runs and compiles those files, because it's happening at runtime,
yep.
essentially crawlers, you can defer, but usually they're a little bit unreliable. Google says they're good about, they're not great.
Yeah, that's okay. That's on our wish list,
Yeah.
in fact. But because all the data's there, client side, right? I'm not sure if SEO would crawl template tag or not. I kind of hope they don't. Like, it should be inert. But ideally, you should just be able to flip a switch and say, we're going to give you an SEO version of this that renders immediately, because it's already there. It's already markup. So why not provide it? Yeah. So
Right. But if you did compile the markup and it was tied into state and you were updating it, how?
yeah, it wouldn't. The state part wouldn't go. But
I see. Okay.
yeah, but you could have markup that's basically machine processable. It's not that different from what we would give to the React app. So I don't see why we couldn't just make a copy of it that is, seen by crawlers, but not seen by React or eyeballs.
Gotcha.
But yeah,
Phantom
that it's been
liker,
discussed
yeah.
because we feel like SSR would like just dealing with and dealing with Node.js rendering should be a really good feature of this. But right now we don't have it.
Gotcha. Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah, appreciate it.
Cool.
One more small one. Maybe people in the room already know, but I don't. You showed the little widget that shows which templates are which block. Is that already available even without JSX?
Let's see.
Or
are you
just
talking-
having that information on the page of like, hey, this is the template you need to look at without going into the sources?
It is available, in the JSX theme engine version.
Yeah, this.
So, and in fact, it gives you theme suggestions. So, when you click on it, it will show you what it's using, and then it'll show you more specific things, just like Twig.
Cool.
And but the mapping part, that honestly isn't available. So that's something that still has to be done manually, and I feel has to be addressed before this is something that can be like broadly marketed as like a great solution.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. And yeah, I guess that hits time, but thank you so much for sticking around, checking this out.